brings us very nicely to Annie Bannister, who is a lawyer working in the UK. I think Annie works with the West Midlands Police. And Annie has prepared her presentation to give the legal practitioner's perspective on the research and the key findings from it. It's wonderful to have Annie with us this afternoon. And if I can beg everybody's indulgence, this is the final presentation that we will have. And then we will close proceedings. Yvonne van de Kar is the other co-president who is with us this evening, and she will close proceedings. So over to you, Annie, and welcome.
Thank you very much. And hopefully you can all hear me.
Yes.
So I was just asked really from a sort of practical perspective, and also being a lawyer and a member of Renate, to really sort of take you through, just for a couple of minutes, some of the issues, to summarise really what this research has all been about. So first of all, as already mentioned, in the formal education of a lawyer across the 5 countries we looked at, we only found Albania included human trafficking in that formal education. For instance, when I was training to be a lawyer, I was given the option as one of my assessments to look at the Modern Slavery Act that was had just come in the UK. So while it wasn't on the curriculum, you know, it was on the fringes of the formal education that I went through. So what happens is, once a lawyer is qualified, if they find themselves either drawn towards helping victims of human trafficking, or by just perchance the job they end up getting, there is assistance for victims, then specialist training has to be searched out. Often that's just individual research, or, as mentioned earlier, you end up shadowing other lawyers to try and learn from them how they do it. The other sort of critical thing to say is human trafficking is constantly evolving as a crime. The way it's done, the way it affects victims. And as useful lawyers, we need to understand that as well, and just trying to keep even 2 steps behind these traffickers and the way that they are dealing with humans and the trafficking they're doing is very, very important. So finding number 1 really is there's far too few lawyers in the research we've done across these 5 countries who are suitably trained to help victims of human trafficking. And there are, Imelda mentioned, legal deserts. So geographically, particularly away from big cities, it's really very hard for victims to find lawyers that can help them. If we can move to the next slide. So what this just shows you is the timeline for training to be a lawyer. It can take 5 to 10 years to actually qualify to be a lawyer. And if up to that point, lawyers have not really stumbled upon victims of human trafficking, they may quickly specialise in an area where they'll never cross their paths. And then, because of the difficulty really in getting trained and specialised in helping victims of human trafficking, it can take another 5-10 years before you could actually say, I'm a specialist lawyer in the area of human trafficking. That's a long time, and that's lots of lawyers that are falling by the wayside, being trained in this important area. And while there are many lawyers across these 5 countries, many of them have never, ever contemplated being in a situation to help a victim of human trafficking. So if we could move on again, Brian, please. The other thing that you all need to be aware of is that the legal systems in each of our countries, and some of the countries, as Imelda just talked about, England and Wales and Scotland have got different legal systems. So across the whole of the Renata territory, we've got 68 different legal systems to look at. And in the 5 countries we've researched, there's 11. So just at that point, we've got lots of complexity that we need to be aware of. I looked recently just in England and Wales, where I'm qualified to practice law, that there's 4,444 public acts out there, so acts of legislation that I can't possibly be able to be aware of all those 4,400. And if you think I'm somebody that's very interested and work within the area of human trafficking, think of all those other people who maybe only use 5 or 6 pieces of that legislation in their particular territory, and they will never be able to be in the qualified state to help victims of human trafficking. So we can move on again. So what this is showing you, if you look at all the black circles, these are all the things that lawyers who deal with victims of human trafficking will need to be aware of the law in their country, in their jurisdiction, to be able to help victims of human trafficking. And there'll be very few victims of human trafficking that don't need more than 2 or 3 of these black circles. So they're looking for help with compensation. They're looking for help with what's the law about them getting benefits, immigration help. What's this NRM? How do they enter it? Should they enter it? And then a whole area all to do with criminal representation and any defences they can use under the laws of that country because they have gone into a criminal situation as they've been trafficked. So as lawyers, we have to be aware of the laws out there for these 10 black circles or however many there are. And then on the right, you can see 3 blue circles. And these are other areas that lawyers who work with victims of human trafficking need to be very aware of and cognizant of. So what's the free legal aid process for victims of human trafficking across these 10 different black circles of law? What cross-border assistance is required? Who do I need to contact in the different countries who are lawyers for that country that I can deal with? And then increasingly, we would not be able to help many victims of human trafficking without collaboration. And this has been mentioned throughout the last 2 hours of this session. Collaboration is vital, and without people working in other agencies who are not legally qualified, many more victims would have fallen through the gaps. You can move on again, please. So we're left with sort of 2 other key things that have been themes running throughout today's webinar. The first is to do with lack of compensation. Now, I've talked to you about the thousands and thousands of laws out there. That's just in England. There are several laws to do with compensation. And actually, it's not that compensation is necessarily particularly difficult to get. It's more that it's very complex to navigate the laws that are out there and to use them wisely to try and get compensation for victims. And interestingly, as I work for the police, the police have different ways that they can assist victims get compensation outside other types of lawyers. There's also the area of legal aid, which has been mentioned by almost every country. There is an inadequate level of legal aid for victims of trafficking, and it's also very hard to navigate opening up legal aid for different aspects that the victims need. So it's very important that we're aware of this, we collaborate, and we try and help victims access this. So just as a final point here, it would be fantastic to have new, simple legal processes to ensure quick wins for victims. And this would be fantastic. I know Albania was talking about getting a single compensation fund that was statutory in that country. We have one in the UK. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get into, and that's the CICA fund that Imelda mentioned. So on a final point now, we have lawyers that are trained. We don't have enough of them. But putting victims and lawyers together is often very difficult. And this is where collaboration with other agencies is very, very important, that they're aware of us and our skills, and they're able to make contact with us and put us together with victims. So thank you very much, and I'll leave Anne to the next section. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annie. That was just so comprehensive. I don't need to repeat anything you have managed to do, a whistle-stop run through this afternoon's proceedings. Thank you so much, Annie. Before I hand over to Yvonne, I'll go back to Brian, because in terms of the structures of this afternoon, Brian pieced the whole thing together. And we did have an extra video that we were going to show to you, but given that we've run out of time, we've decided not to run with that. So Brian, if you want to say a few words, please, before.
Yes, I can, and thank you very much indeed. The wealth and the richness of what was shared really has taken up the time, but it was worth hearing everything that we heard. And our intention now is, we did have a piece from the victim's voice from earlier in the year, and it is what we would regard, I suppose, as a substantial piece. It is about 15 minutes to 20 minutes long, but we just thought people have been here long enough now, but our intention is to send out the recording of this. But at the very beginning, we might put in the piece that we have to video, which is the victim's voice. We will also send out a copy of the report, and we will send out also a copy of the PowerPoint presentations that many of you have seen and have accompanied this presentation. So just to thank you all for attending, and the translators and everybody. I'm going to hand back to Anne now, who will hand, I think, to Yvonne maybe to close, and to say then that we will send out everything to everybody in due course. So thank you, Anne.
Brian. That's very reassuring for everybody, because I know in some of the chats that have come in, people have asked, can they have recordings? Are the PowerPoints available? And where they can access the research. You mentioned thanks to our translators.
I just,
Annie, yes?
Could I just make a mention about the video that Brian's going to send out? I think the value of that victim's voice is the way he talks about the difference between some lawyers he's had and one that was very victim-centered. And I think, you know, that's a valuable hearing from someone else about what a lawyer can do for you, you know, and for him as a victim of human trafficking, as a child of criminal exploitation, who he was just seen as a bad boy, and the way somebody turned that around. So I just wanted to preface, you know, the kind of story that it tells, because it goes from that side.
Thank you, Ruth. And that refers to it's an interview by Phil Brewer, who is retired from the Metropolitan Police since 2019. He is a research fellow at St. Mary's University in Twickenham, and he has interviewed a young man called Sousa, who was a person who's lived experience of child criminal exploitation. And the dialogue between Phil and Sousa gives expression to the essentials of the recognition of the fundamentals of humanity: building trust, being in relationship, being genuinely interested and invested in the well-being of the victim, securing the rights for those with the lived experience of human trafficking. It's really an interview with a story of hope, which gives sound advice to legal practitioners to look deeper, peel back the layers of the onion of the person who is the victim, who is entrusted into your care as a legal practitioner. Treat them like your own is actually what comes out. So Ruth, thank you for that intervention there. So when everybody receives the recording, that will be top-ended by the interview between the practitioner, between Phil Brewer, the researcher at St. Mary's, and Sosa, who is the survivor. You mentioned, Brian, in relation to translators, Katerina and Mary-Lou, we have extended the time. Normally there would be a little break for translators, but we didn't have the time for that this afternoon, but we are immensely grateful to both of you. I also want to mention my colleague Sarika behind the scenes, who has been busy making sure that everybody has been admitted and present and secured and facilitated in this afternoon's meeting. And thank you to the members of the Law Task Group. As a moderator, I need to lay that out there. The members of that task group, I think Adina expressed it so eloquently when she said that you all went over, above, and beyond what was required as workers within a task group, volunteer members. And you continue to work because you have the Law Watch little edition every month as well. So beavers, busy beavers. So thank you, especially to members of the task force and to the person who has led them, who is very modest. Brian is stepping back, but Brian has put in the elbow work to make sure that everything gets done in the loveliest way, in the most encouraging way. So thank you so much, Brian. Over to our co-president, Mary, topped the meeting in welcoming. I'll hand over to the spotlight to Yvonne and say goodnight to everybody. Over to you, Yvonne. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Okay, so I just won't keep you very long. I just want to end this meeting with a few words. Like Brian started, Renata is a network, and this is precisely what this research is about. So it's very important. I just want to thank all the members of Renata and St. Mary's University and all the people who did all this hard work to get this result. We also want to thank our sponsor, Hilton Foundation Sisters Initiative. And we want to thank all of you who were present here tonight. And of course, we also want to thank Brian, but also Anne for being facilitators of this event. And so we want to thank all who have worked on the realization of this wonderful report. I don't know if you can see it. To me, it was very impressive to hear about the results in all 5 countries tonight. And to end this meeting, I would like to ask all of you to keep the victims, survivors, but also the workers against trafficking in your prayers. Thank you all.
Thank you, Yvonne, and good night, everybody.